Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and today it is my number 3 team in my NFL Deep Dive series for the 2023 season. It's the Cincinnati Bengals. Make sure to hit the like, leave a comment in the comment section. Both of those things help out with the algorithms tremendously. It pushes this video out to more people so more people can watch it and more people can negatively judge me, and I hope that you guys can subscribe as well, help out with the channel, get it to monetization. That would be super cool. Also, maybe make a couple ducats off of this stuff. And speaking of ducats, Joe Burrow, Mr. Ducats himself, leading this Bengals team. He's done a tremendous job. This Bengals team has somehow, some way, really because of him, found their way into being Super Bowl contenders and possibly being the best team in the AFC at least. Maybe one of the best teams in the league, if not the best team in the league. Definitely a team that I wouldn't be opposed to seeing people bet on to be Super Bowl champions. They got a decent coaching staff, a little uninventive, I will say. I think that's a true test for this coaching staff coming forward this year, and we'll get into that when we get into the coaching staff breakdown. But I want to see some more inventiveness out of this coaching staff for sure. They're one of the least inventive coaching staffs, at least on the offensive side of the ball. They're not exactly Andy Reid and the Chiefs or Sirianni and the Eagles when it comes to a Zach Taylor kind of milquetoast boring. As we go along, they've done a great job of drafting ahead of their needs, a year ahead of their needs. Not quite Philadelphia in that aspect of it, but they did a great job because now they got guys filling in like Cam Taylor, Britt on the defense, Dax Hill on the defense. They drafted DJ Turner, Jordan Battle, DJ Ivy to be depth pieces there in the secondary. Signed Nick Scott, so a bit of a revamping there to a degree of their secondary, at least from a bottom perspective. They still have Mike Hilton, Chidobe Awuzie, who are going to the last years of their contract, I believe. Sneaky good linebacking group. They used their first-round pick on Clemson edge rusher Myles Murphy, who expect to be a rotational piece in his rookie year. Again, sort of like what we saw with Dax Hill last year. But they also have Trey Hendrickson, one of the best pass rushers in the NFL. We'll see what he can do throughout this season. Talked about Burrow. Joe Mixon took a pay cut to stick around, see if he can get back, put that chip on his shoulder, be one of the best running backs in the NFL again. Perhaps that does it, or maybe he just isn't the guy that he used to be. Maybe all these analysts were right and he should have gotten cut and they should have focused on maybe getting Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs, even though neither one fell to them. What can I say about Jamar Chase? One of the best. We'll talk about him later and what my expectations are for him, which are Justin Jefferson level production. And T. Higgins, probably the best number 2 wide receiver in the NFL right now. Could be a number 1 on a plethora of NFL teams, especially this year. Tyler Boyd, one of the better slot guys. Lots of big catch radiuses here for one of the most accurate quarterbacks in the NFL, if not the most accurate quarterback in the NFL, Joe Burrow. So the amount of production we could see out of this pass offense when you combine those two things, this could be the MVP year for Joe Burrow, despite the lack of having a legitimate threat at the tight end position and an offensive line that's going to be questioned quite a bit coming into this season. I expect, it to be maybe a rocky road, and we'll get to why I think that and how the coaching staff on the offensive side really comes into play there as to why those struggles could occur and what they do to get the best 5 guys on the offensive line. And you hope that you can get that team to perform at the next step despite maybe some deficiencies in the offensive play calling and offensive imagination and play design and play calling and strategizing. This could be the last year for both of these coordinators, as they both could end up being head coaches. They both got interviews last year. Lou Anarumo really just sort of stuck around as a defensive guy. And with the new pieces that he has there, losing Jesse Bates, I think is going to be a big one for him. And how he responds as a coach and gets the most out of the guys replacing him, Nick Scott and Dax Hill, and even Jordan Battle, I think is going to be determinative of whether or not he is the defensive coordinator on this team next year. I think that he could be sort of like Jonathan Gannon was in being that top defensive coordinator, getting moved over, and DeMeco Ryans, of course, as well, was part of that. But let's just get to it. hopefully the run time on this isn't too long. Let's get to the coaching staff and we'll talk about them. So this is my 16th ranked coaching staff. It is right smack dab in the middle of the league, and it is close. I mean, I said this a couple other videos. Maybe I should have done like a tier system, because I feel like it is close, and this just causes like controversy for people. But there's like little packs of like 6 or 7 coaching staffs at a time, outside of really like the top 2 or 3. And I don't not like Zach Taylor. Could they do better? Obviously. Could they do worse? Definitely. I think that him and Callahan have like a good thing going on. I just wish that they were maybe a little bit more inventive. I think that they, in contrast to what you see with the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan, is Shanahan kind of sees that he has this offensive line that isn't all that great, but he specifically schemes around that so that the offensive line and their lack of talent that we'll get to in a future video just isn't as much of a factor. And I think that the Bengals with Zach Taylor, he's sort of not done that very well. That's sort of where I would say his deficiency is. Now, they've done a great job of throwing resources at the offensive line, and we'll get to the offensive line that they've built over the last 2 years, which is significantly improved on what they had in the past. But there's still enough deficiencies there where you would hope that coming into this season, with Burrow with the calf injury, that they're going to figure out a way to get around that where it doesn't end up costing them in the long run. We saw that offensive line, they pretty much cost them the Super Bowl. They were really half a second away from taking, would have been like the game tying touchdown or the game leading touchdown late in the game, but then because the offensive line didn't hold up, it was an incomplete pass and the game was over. I think that, you see it with even last year. It was the same sort of thing. La'el Collins, of course, was not 100% healthy. Jonah Williams didn't really perform up to snuff. It seems like he's on his way out at some point. The La'el Collins injury has put Jonah Williams in a spot where he might be able to revive his career at right tackle with Orlando Brown now at left tackle. But there's still those types of things that Zach Taylor has to work around on the offensive side of the ball. On the defensive side of the ball, Lou Anarumo is actually fantastic. And he's done a great job of really developing players. He took Trey Hendrickson from the Saints. And Trey Hendrickson now is one of the best pass rushing defensive ends in the entire league. And they really picked him up based upon upside and the projected production that they could get out of him, because he wasn't really that guy in New Orleans, really, when you look back. He was always sort of like the number 3, maybe a number 2 guy, because he was always sort of hidden behind Cam Jordan, and they were sort of scheming that defense around Cam Jordan, getting those free shots on the quarterback, hopefully. So him coming in and them drafting Myles Murphy, now he's got really a high upside defensive end now to mold, that he doesn't have to rush onto the field right away, because they've done such a great job of adding different types of pieces all over that defensive line at the edge position. The interior defensive line, he's going to have a little bit of a harder time, I think, but he's still got two really good guys there in the middle. I think that they'll run into problems, though, if they get injuries. So it'll be up to him also to make sure that they figure out a way to sort of hide those deficiencies. And he has to get the most out of Dax Hill this year. Is Dax Hill going to be used the exact same way Jesse Bates was? And Jesse Bates, by my estimation, going into last year at least, I had him as the number 1 safety in the league. And I still think he holds up as like a top 5, top 6 safety even today. How is Dax Hill going to, now given all these opportunities, he's going to take all the snaps that were once Jesse Bates' snaps. He's pretty much going to have to fill that role in. That's why they drafted him last year under the assumption that they were at best getting one more year at Jesse Bates. So Anarumo is going to have to figure out what Jesse Bates can do that Dax Hill can also do, and the things that Dax Hill can't do that Jesse Bates could do, and then have to maneuver around that safety group a little bit. They did do a great job of they continuously kept drafting those like day 2, early day 3 cornerbacks. DJ Turner's there now, so he's sort of going to sit as that number 4 corner on this roster. But with the expiring contracts of Mike Hilton and Chidobe Awuzie, it's sort of going to be, he seems to be in the same position that Cam Taylor-Britt was in last year, where now Cam Taylor-Britt is stepping in his second year in the league as the starting cornerback. They also got DJ Ivey, who I think was a sneaky pick. I think he can be a real sneaky guy that they can use in that secondary as well. But Anarumo, because of the strength of the offenses in this conference, is going to have to continue to be at the top of his game. And I think that's why he got a lot of head coaching buzz last year, is because they saw like how good he was doing against some really good talent. And now that talent level has increased again. You know, it seems like every team in the AFC now, outside of maybe 1 or 2, is better than what they were last year. And it's the strongest conference that I can remember in a long time. Just the quarterback talent alone is unbelievable. So he's going to have his work cut out for him. And I do think that if the Bengals have this type of success this year, if the defense puts up some really good numbers considering the level of competition, Lou Anarumo is going to be a head coach next year. Callahan, I think with the offensive side, he got some buzz as well. I'm more inclined to think that maybe if this team sees a lot of success, Callahan might be a little higher on people's list because they like to hire offensive coaches, because it's the thing where offensive coordinators don't last on staffs. They're sort of like a revolving door of offensive coordinators in the league now, and that's why teams like to have those offensive head coaches and not necessarily a defensive head coach, because then you'd rather change your defensive setup and your defensive strategy rather than continuously throwing different offenses at a quarterback, especially if you have a young quarterback. And I think that's why you see teams like the Indianapolis Colts get an offensive guy, why the Bengals went and got Zach Taylor, even though they probably could have gotten a better option with somebody else. But they went with the offensive guy with a specific scheme, with a specific style, because they wanted to pair him up with Joe Burrow, and they've been a great combination, I will say that. And that's the one thing that Zach Taylor does bring, is that him and Joe Burrow do seem to have an understanding of what Burrow does good, what Burrow does great, and what Burrow doesn't necessarily do well. And they drafted really well around Joe Burrow, and Zach Taylor does know how to use those weapons very, very well. Again, to me, it's going to come down to how he schemes up around the deficiencies of the offensive line, at least early on in the season. That offensive line, they do have the capabilities where, we might see Orlando Brown take a step and go back to being like a top 10 tackle in the league. Jonah Williams might be able to perform to a certain level. They might be able to kick him into guard, and then Lael Collins might be able to kick into guard maybe, and then one of them plays tackle, and you might be able to get an actual legitimately good starting 5 out of this group. I think that it's up to, though, that's the real challenge that Zach Taylor is going to have. And his lack of inventiveness up until this point is sort of why I have my doubts, and why this coaching staff doesn't rank necessarily closer to the top 10, and it's more right here where it is in the very middle of the pack because of those question marks. But one thing that is not a question mark is that they have probably the best quarterback in football. I mean, I think that it's really a 3-man race right now with Mahomes, Burrow, and Josh Allen. Just as a pure thrower of the ball, like Burrow doesn't have this elite level arm strength that you'll see out of Mahomes and out of Josh Allen. But what he does have that those guys don't is he's probably the most accurate quarterback. Like, he's got such a smooth release, those intermediate routes. He's going to be on the money every time, and no matter how good the coverage is from that defensive back, that ball's going to go to a place where only the receiver can catch it. And when you give him receivers with such amazing hands like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, guys he's also got chemistry with, this is the makings of a top-level elite offense. And when they drafted him, there obviously were question marks. He was going to have to continue to develop. He really only had 1 year in college where people were like, oh, this guy can play. It was such a great performance that it launched him from being like somebody who was looked at as a day 3 quarterback pick going into that season as the number 1 pick in the draft. And it created this trend where people were going, okay, who's the Joe Burrow this year in college? Who's the guy that's gonna come out of nowhere, dominate, and end up leapfrogging these already projected top quarterbacks? Because Justin Herbert and Tua were really the 2 quarterbacks coming into that year that people were like, these are the top 2 quarterbacks. Justin Herbert, probably the number 1 quarterback. He had been that for those 2 years, really. And then Joe Burrow comes and they're like, maybe they'll take Joe Burrow, and that assume that it finally clicked for him and put him into a system with a coach that will be able to run that similar thing that he really succeeded in. And that's really what Zach Taylor did with him. And outside of that rookie year where he got hurt, I think in like the middle of the rookie year or something, he's been lights out great. And in an amazing turn of events, really showing what drafting a top-level quarterback and having that quarterback hit can do. The Bengals, because of Joe Burrow, are now a Super Bowl contender every year. For as long until Burrow proves otherwise, that he's not in a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, they're a Super Bowl contender. And I think this could be the year, because they've made like little improvements on the offensive line. They've added like little depth pieces on the offensive weaponry that we'll get to. This could be the Joe Burrow MVP season, especially considering the teams that he's going to be playing. If he has all that success against all those teams, it'll be hard to deny him the MVP unless you get someone like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, who obviously just light the world on fire the way that we've seen them do. But I think if Burrow is just a little bit better in 1 or 2 of those categories, he keeps the interceptions down, I think that could make a huge difference for them. And I think if they can dominate their division, that'll make a huge difference as well. Because I think of the top 3 quarterbacks that I listed, he's in the best position to succeed, probably because, he's not the AFC East, which is extremely difficult, and the AFC West, where the Chiefs have had a target on their back for so long that you get these teams targeting them now more than ever, especially coming off of now another Super Bowl win. The Bengals have sort of entered into somehow kind of still staying under the radar of the great teams in the league, as San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Kansas City have sort of established themselves as like the favorites amongst the fan base and in the media. The Bengals still, I guess, because Cincinnati, who the hell cares about that city? They've sort of sat underneath the radar here, and Joe Burrow's a gigantic part of that. Having them, gigantic part of them being able to capitalize on that and be a top team in the NFL. And he's going to be able to play with all these different weapons now. And his accuracy, imagine if his accuracy took a second step. Oh my goodness. They don't have a backup. I'm not going to talk about Jake Browning. And if we could see perhaps Joe Burrow improve on his arm strength and maybe have the ability to push the ball more down the field with a guy like Jamar Chase, who we've seen them push the ball down the field to him, but with these big catch radius guys, Chase, Higgins, and Tyler Boyd, that's, I think, could be the difference in Joe Burrow going from being like, oh, he's a top 5, top 3 quarterback to being he's an MVP quarterback in the NFL. So now we're going to go into their running threats here. And we'll start with Joe Mixon, who for a couple seasons there was considered one of the best running backs in the league. And he's sort of taken, maybe a step back. He took a giant pay cut I wouldn't say giant, but a pay cut to stay with the team this year under the guise of I want to win a Super Bowl. So I still think he's the best running back on the team for sure. He should get a majority of the carries, but they've created a backfield now where he's going to have opportunities to stay fresher throughout games and throughout the season. And it starts in there with, Travion Williams, who I think is going to be probably more of a receiving threat in this offense. Come in as that third down, extra pass protection, run a little bit of a route out there. I wouldn't say that him and Joe Mixon are all that different in their abilities to do that, but I think that would be the role that Travion Williams would really take on. I think he can really succeed at that level. And then I think as a, first and second down replacement option, the rookie that they drafted, Chase Brown, I think is going to fill that role in the offense as well. So we got Joe Mixon, who I still think is a 3-down, all-purpose running back, but they've done a good job of putting these two guys in position to be a good support system for him. And and now when you have to take Joe Mixon off the field, they were able to put Samaje Perine in there last year, and he went to another team, got a little bit of money, but I think that the combination of these two is better than what they were doing when they were just simply putting in Perine, and then Travion Williams got a little bit of a bone thrown his way. But again, I do really like Travion Williams. I do think he's a little bit better than Mixon, not enough where I think he's going to take a majority of the snaps away. They also got Chris Evans, who just, quietly is sort of the same as a Travion Williams to me. I think he's probably the fourth best first and second down back by not even that much. I think that their depth, they did a great job of putting three really good depth pieces in there. I think Chase Brown's the only one that still has something to prove on those third down passing situations as a guy to stand back there and help pass protect, picking up blitzes, and to go out there and run some routes and catch the ball on a consistent basis. But that's not going to be a role that Chase Brown is going to have to play, at least in his rookie year. There are three guys on this roster that will be doing that before him. I think he has an advantageous is in an advantageous situation as a rookie where he can focus on really just one role, and that's a first and second down option as just, take the handoff, get some positive yards, find the hole, press the gaps, all that kind of stuff. And then let Travion Williams do sort of more of the pretty work. And then Joe Mixon, bell cow, 20 touches a game type of a running back. You hope that that's what you can get out of Joe Mixon, is average him about 20 touches a game, in the running game, a couple of passes, screen passes and whatnot. You're not going to have him out there like Christian McCaffrey, but, a well-designed screen pass, I think will put Joe Mixon in a position to do really well. And I think Joe Mixon might actually feel like he's got something to prove this year, as he was really talked about in the media as being somebody that perhaps they should cut. And there was a lot of talk of, hey, maybe Bijan Robinson falls to the Bengals. Obviously that didn't happen. Running backs went much higher in this draft than people expected, 2 of them in the top 12. But there was talk there for a long time where it's like, if Bijan's there, or Jahmyr Gibbs is there even, why not just take them and cut Joe Mixon in that big contract and then run with a top quality running back for 5 years and then spend that money elsewhere? And I think all that talk might have put a chip on Joe Mixon's shoulder, because Joe Mixon's always, he was sort of that guy who fell in the draft because, they were talking about off the field issues and attitude issues. So he's always sort of been that guy with that brewing, attitude where the ego might take over a little bit and give him some issues on and off the field. But I think putting a chip on a guy like his shoulder, the way that I feel like it has, we might see Joe Mixon get back to where he was at his peak, just based upon him getting that ball and him running like an absolute animal just because, oh, you guys think I'm done? You think I should be cut? Well, I'm going to show you type of a deal. And I think Joe Mixon has that type of personality where this could all really work out tremendously for the Bengals offense in general. Now let's talk about the receivers and the tight ends. And they have probably, arguably, the best receiver. I mean, he's at least top 5 in the league in Ja'Marr Chase. And he was that from the moment he came into the league. And he's only getting better somehow. And as him and Joe Burrow continue to grow together, they're only going to get better. I look at Ja'Marr Chase and I see a guy who's got the potential this year to be a record breaker. A third year, more comfortable in the offense. There's a little bit of a decrease in the talent in the actual secondaries that he's going to be playing, specifically in Baltimore. Some inexperience in Pittsburgh. This could be the year that Ja'Marr Chase sort of takes up that Justin Jefferson spot. We saw Justin Jefferson, as the offensive player of the year with all 1,800 yards, 100-something catches. I could see Ja'Marr Chase going 120, 1,800, and like 16 touchdowns, 17 touchdowns. I don't think that that's out of the realm of possibilities for him, especially with how they are going to be running this offense, where at least early on, it's going to feel maybe like Joe Mixon is touching the ball a little less than he would maybe later in the season when it gets a little bit colder and they might, with the area that they play in and the teams they're going to be playing, and they're going to be playing some home games in the playoffs too. Even if they go and play in Kansas City and Buffalo, those are going to be colder games. They're going to want a healthy running game. So Ja'Marr Chase, I think, could do a lot of damage in the first 3 quarters of the season in particular. And then it's not to be outdone by T. Higgins, who they're talking about. They want to really keep him. There are rumors of him being traded back in the spring, late winter before the draft, because they're trying to figure out how to keep all these guys. And I do think that them keeping T. Higgins, who's a completely different type of wide receiver than Ja'Marr Chase, it gives them a really good balance in the passing game. And then they have Tyler Boyd, who was a good number 2 receiver on this team even before they drafted Ja'Marr Chase when they did at the number 5 overall pick in the draft. But man, he could be a guy who's not long for this world in Cincinnati. But he might be the difference maker in making this like the best wide receiver room in the league, just because of how well he complements Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins. He's like a bigger slot player who can play on the outside if you need him to, which allows you to then move Ja'Marr Chase around a little bit and make defenses acknowledge where he is a lot. So Tyler Boyd really works well in this offense. I think even though his production is not as high as it was previously, I think he serves a much more significant role now, and he's a much better cog in the wheel of this offense than he was before because of the other guys that are around him and how he, as a player, complements them. I think he could be looking at a much bigger payday unless he decides to stay in Cincinnati. I don't really know what his contract looked like. Last time I checked, it was last year. I don't know if he got extended since then. I wouldn't imagine that he has, just because I think that he knows that he's bound to make some money in this upcoming offseason, and maybe the Bengals can figure out a way to keep him. I'm not so sure that that's going to happen, and I also think that they've done a good job in this last draft of drafting wide receivers. We'll get to them shortly, but they brought in Irv Smith to play tight end after Hayden Hurst went away. This might be the weakest position on the team. But because of the way that they've moved around these receivers, and Irv Smith is always going to be sort of like the 5th guy anyway. This tight end position was always sort of going to be the 5th option unless they had a top level tight end, obviously. So there's not going to be this. I don't think there's any of these giant expectations for the tight end position on this team. You got Mitchell Wilcox, Drew Sample, whatever. But they drafted Charlie Jones and Andre Iosivas, Iosivas? However, and they were pretty much drafted because they're expecting to lose, I would say Tyler Boyd at this point. So allowing these guys to come in, I think they're really good rookie pickups. And I think in this offense, they can really thrive, especially if they're not expected to be a top 2 receiver on this team. You're really just saying whichever one of these guys breaks out as the guy is going to be the one that's going to be on more featured in this offense, perhaps later in the year and then into next year as well. I think that Iosivas could be the more under the radar guy that could leapfrog Charlie Jones, but from what I'm seeing, I could be mistaken, but on the depth chart, Charlie Jones is going to be like the return guy. So he's going to have these opportunities to make more dynamic plays early in the year that might put him on the radar of the coaching staff faster than Iosivas would. So it's going to, I think Charlie Jones by sort of default is going to have more opportunities in the rookie year. So how he takes advantage of those will determine what happens long term for this group. But they're also in a position where they're so strong in so many positions that they could go out and use a day 1, early day 2 pick on a receiver next year. And I don't think that too many people would be against that. I know sort of like with this thing with Bijan with Joe Mixon, there was a lot of talk also like, hey, maybe they'll just take like Quentin Johnston or Zay Flowers or JSN if they fall to them. There was a lot of that talk where it's like, if one of these like big offensive weapons falls, they'll take them. And I think the fan base is okay with that. They understand what's going on. I think they're more focused on keeping Burrow and Chase together above all. And then T. Higgins sort of falls as that number 3 guy. And then everyone else, I think the fan base and the organization sort of accepts as being guys that they have to see as expendable and how they can replace them. They can replace them in the draft with a cheaper contract, but still get equal, if not better, play out of it. They're going to be open to that and then maybe spend their money elsewhere in veteran offensive linemen like we saw them do the last couple years. All right, so let's talk about it. The offensive line, I kind of went in on this during the coaching aspect of it. So let's start with the pass blocking. They brought in Orlando Brown, who was just over there in Kansas City, Baltimore as well. Played left tackle in Kansas City after demanding to be that. So he's going to come in and be the left tackle here. Ted Karras is actually a really, really good pass blocking center. He's a really good anchor to have on that offensive line. Alex Kappa is sort of your, middle of the pack, above average guard. Cordell Volson is the guy that's really in the competition here because you look at Lael Collins, and could you bump Lael Collins into guard and then get maybe a little bit more out of him at this point in his career? I think we'll see. I think Lael Collins is going to be starting the season suspended or injured for the first 4 weeks. One of the two. I know he's not playing the first couple weeks of the season for some reason or the other. There's so many reasons why certain guys aren't playing. But that's where Jonah Williams comes in. And Jonah Williams, I think, has the potential. You can put him at right tackle. I think obviously he's going to start right tackle at the beginning of the year. But then it's really Cordell Volson at left guard. What do you do with that? Do you bump Jonah Williams into guard and Lael Collins plays tackle when he comes back? Do you do Lael Collins into guard and leave Jonah Williams at right tackle? Do you put Jackson Carman at guard? Jackson Carman got snaps at left tackle last year. Do you put Trey Hill at guard? I mean, there's a couple options here for them. I don't really like Cody Ford or Max Sharping. I think that I don't understand what that was. I mean, I know they kept some extra linemen because the line is really where all the struggles are. So I get that, but I don't know if when Lael Collins comes back that Sharping or Ford are both going to be on this team after that. But I think that there should be a healthy competition there for that left guard and right tackle position. I think the other 3 positions you have them locked down really well. But I think in a pass blocking aspect, Jonah Williams has to almost figure out a way to be on the field. Now we take a look at the run blocking. Lael Collins does take a step up here, but pretty much everyone else takes a step down, at least to some degree. And again, this is really what I'm harping on. I mean, Kappa, Karras, Orlando Brown, Lael Collins. They've thrown money at this offensive line, getting guys that had either good years right before they came in or guys who were trending upward. And they sort of just continued to give them average output, at the very least, very inconsistent output. And this is, again, where I talk about maybe Lael Collins does go to guard and you let Jonah Williams play right tackle or vice versa, because Cordell Volson is just not that guy for me. Jackson Carman does not run block very well, so maybe your best 5 option is having Brown, Williams, Karras, Kappa, and Lael Collins, and then figure out who the right tackle and left guard is in that scenario between Collins and Jonah Williams. Because I just don't see a world where this offensive line is going to be able to sustain the offensive production that's going to be needed to win a lot of these games this year with a guy like Cordell Volson on the field, who is so clearly and evidently the weak link. He looked good his rookie year in training camp, and people were pounding the table at me in my previous deep dive series last year about, we got Cordell Volson, we're good. I'm like, sure, let's see how that works out for you. And Cordell Volson did not play well. He did not play well at all. There was a couple other guys on the offensive line that didn't play up to snuff either, but he was most certainly the worst one in both aspects, pass blocking and run blocking. So I think that's something he either has to take a gigantic leap forward this year, or they're going to have to figure out a way to get Jonah Williams on the field as well and keep him on the field, because he is going to start the year, like I said. So when Lael Collins does come back, Cordell Volson is going to have played in a way that justifies his spot on the field, because unless Jonah Williams somehow sucked more than he did, they're going to be in a situation where they're going to want to put their best 5 on the field. Dante Smith is like another swing tackle for them. But again, in run blocking, they don't really have anybody. They don't really have this top-notch offensive line. I feel like maybe they could have drafted an offensive lineman in the first round. I understand why they did what they did in the draft. But it could come back to bite them. It could come back to bite them in the big situation the way this offensive line has the last couple of years. So just running down the positional summaries again. In terms of passing offense, the top weapons, they're all there. It's the offensive line that's going to be a bit of an issue here. And I think that the offensive line is the issue in general. Because if they got like above average offensive line play, this could be like top 5 in every aspect of offensive play. But it's just, they're going to be lacking in certain areas. So this is going to be the 6th best passing offense, but the 28th rush offense for the 19th overall offense in the league. And it's dragged down by the rush offense. I think that this offensive line is going to be a detriment. They're going to be able to put up points because their passing offense is so strong. Their ability to put games away could become an issue, especially in closer games. I think if they can get out to, they're a team that's definitely capable, and they will get out to like 2-3 score leads in games. But when you get to their ability to finish these games off, when you look at, say, on a betting perspective, like point spread, if they're favored by more than 7 points in a game, I would almost be inclined to take the underdog, because I could see this team playing a lot of closer games, winning a lot of them, but because of the lack of rush offense and the offensive line in general, I think their opponents are going to be able to stay in games and perhaps get back in games late, because they're going to really understand that this team's really only able to pass the football for the most part in a more consistently and effective way. Now let's move on to the defensive side of the ball, and let's talk about the defensive ends Trey Hendrickson and Sam Hubbard. 2 really good complements of one another. Sam Hubbard's more like that, 3 down, good number 2 pass rusher, and a solid early down defensive end as well. Trey Hendrickson, his specialty is go and sack the quarterback, and he's one of the best at it. He's had a great run since coming to Cincinnati. They paid him well, and he's outperformed the contract. They also have a good interior defensive line as well, especially on these passing situations. DJ Reader is a really well-rounded nose tackle who has shown really interesting pass rush abilities for a guy that's like a traditional nose tackle type. And then you got BJ Hill, who is that 3 technique defensive tackle who got kind of lost with the Giants, and then the Bengals kind of stole him in that trade. I know the Giants tried to get Billy Price, and they're like, maybe we can revitalize his career. We're going to have to cut BJ Hill anyway. But BJ Hill was a favorite in the Giants fan base when he was there, and now I think you can say the same thing about him with the Bengals. And it's because he is got that, like, he's above average at everything. You know, he's always going to be, hustling and giving you that maximum effort. And it creates for some really fun moments. And being the 4th best guy, that's a really good position to be in. If BJ Hill's your 4th best guy in your front 4. And then you talk about some of the edge depth. We talked about Myles Murphy a bit during the coaching part. He's going to get opportunities as sort of a rotational edge rusher. Joseph Osai, who sort of started to break out last year, but I think the drafting of Myles Murphy was telling just about where they feel like Osai's ceiling is in particular. And then Cam Sample is like this bigger, I would say more early down defensive end. Joseph Osai is different also than Myles Murphy in the sense that you can almost put him at off-ball linebacker. You talk about guys like Lorenzo Carter, which seems to be where Joseph Osai, people are saying he's a better version of Lorenzo Carter. I think that maybe that he ends up being what Lorenzo Carter is in the NFL, which is an off-ball linebacker / third down edge guy. Sort of like a poor man's Kyle Van Noy. On the interior, they really only have Jay Tufele for these passing situations. He is quite good in this situation, but I would be more inclined to just keep Reader and Hill in that situation. Zach Carter is very similar to Cam Sample, but has shown more capabilities as an interior guy, while Sample's sort of shown the opposite. So, like, when they drafted Zach Carter, it was like, well, you had Cam Sample the year before. You kind of drafted the exact same player, but, Zach Carter is much better interior than he is on the edge, and Cam Sample's sort of the opposite, even though they are very similar in size and skill set. So now let's go to the defensive line against the run, and they weren't as good last year against the run on the defense side of the ball either. Sam Hubbard's solid. Cam Sample, this is where he gets an opportunity to shine, I think, this year. You throw him in on early downs, give Trey Hendrickson a bit of a break. You want to see more out of DJ Reader in terms of run defense, because he is that traditional nose tackle, and he was better on passing downs than running downs last year, and you want to see him step up his game and be better coming in throughout this year. I think he can get to a point where he'll be in those like mid 80s for defensive line run defense come this time next year. Trey Hendrickson, he's not terrible. I think you would just be more inclined to see him. I think Sam Hubbard, you're probably more comfortable with him on early downs. He is the better edge setter, discipline in run defense. Maybe Myles Murphy gets opportunities here to develop his game in run defense as well. But as it stands, he's sort of going to be the rotational third down edge rusher. I don't expect him to get a lot of snaps unless there's an injury picked up this year. But, working him in, sort of like he's almost like on the Dax Hill plan, it seems, in terms of he's going to come in, maybe not play a whole lot, and then second year is where he's going to he's going to come into play, like sort of drafting a year ahead of your needs type of a deal, which the really great teams have been doing. I think the Eagles really mastered it at this point. In terms of interior depth, you don't have anything on early downs. So that's going to be a gigantic concern for this team this year, is if they pick up an injury to Reader or BJ Hill, they may have to look outside their building to find someone to at least come in and be an early down interior defensive lineman. Because you don't want to kick Cam Sample inside. I think you lose a lot of his ability on early downs if you kick him inside, and you're sort of in the same situation here where it's going to be a red grade. Now we're going to move on to the linebackers, and this is a sneaky good position for them. They got some really good pieces here, some really good depth pieces, good situational guys who can come in and actually play at a pretty decently high level. Jermaine Pratt, you'll see him a lot on these passing situations. Logan Wilson is sort of your all-purpose 3-down linebacker who's going to have different guys sort of staying next to him depending on the situation. I think on these sub packages, this is where Jermaine Pratt's going to come in, and I think he really does shine. I think he's better than Logan Wilson in this scenario. This is where Jermaine Pratt really thrived last year. I didn't think he was going to get a big contract, so to me, though Bengals fans argued with me about that, they also got Akeem Davis-Gaither, who could come in and be a good substitute for Logan Wilson, who's going to be on the field a majority of the time. He's going to have the most snaps out of all the linebackers in this group, and this is where it's going to be on third down, where I think Logan Wilson is going to get his quote-unquote breathers, because you do have Davis-Gaither and Joe Batch. You can come in and be decent at that. Marcus Bailey, sort of the opposite of Jermaine Pratt, where he's going to be that early down linebacker who's going to come in and be next to Logan Wilson, who'll be manned up as that Mike linebacker, really good against the run. And then, Jermaine Pratt Marcus Bailey comes in. This is where he's going to get a lot of his work is on early downs, the base 4-3 for this defense, with a guy like Joe Batchy, who this is where he's going to get a lot of his opportunities as well. Jermaine Pratt's still going to, I think, be out there more than a Joe Batchy will. So I think that Logan Wilson's really going to take up a majority of the snaps this year, and then Jermaine Pratt will probably be a close second. And then you'll see Marcus Bailey and Joe Batchy really playing on these early downs as that third linebacker, playing the hot hand, maybe, so to speak. I wouldn't count out Joseph Osai all that much, especially if it's one of those tricky first down situations where you might want to blitz a linebacker. I think that's where Joseph Osai could really come into play here. But on early downs, in terms of just straight up run defense, you got 4 guys who could make up a pretty good group. Akeem Davis-Gaither, I think, is him and Marcus Bailey are sort of in the same boat where they're really only useful in very specific situations right now. Davis-Gaither is an undersized linebacker, so it puts him in a rough position in run defense, and Marcus Bailey sort of the opposite of that. So they're sort of the bookends for each other, while a guy like Joe Batchy and Jermaine Pratt are sort of like your do-it-all guys, while Logan Wilson is also your do-it-all guy, but he's the best version of it. So now let's talk about a very interesting group here that has a lot of upside, but needs to step up their game significantly come this season. You got Chidobe Awuzie, who will show tremendous moments where you're like, this might be a top 10 cornerback in the NFL. And then there'll be other moments where you're like, oh God, I can't believe this guy's the number 1 corner. It was like that in Dallas, and it's like that again in Cincinnati. The compliment to him is Cam Taylor-Britt on the outside. We're looking at him to hopefully take an extra step forward in his second year. Sort of the same thing you're expecting from Dax Hill. These guys not ranked particularly high, didn't get a lot of opportunities, and when they did, they looked okay, and then other times they looked like rookies. which is expected. But now they're being thrust into situations now where they're expected to be starters and they're expected to perform. And they got Mike Hilton, who's a tremendous slot guy. I think he possibly is the odd man out, though, on this team with Awuzie and his contracts, who they both signed those front-loaded deals at the beginning of their run in Cincinnati. They brought in Nick Scott from the Rams, who in pass coverage didn't have a great performance last year, so you're hoping that he can come in and step up that aspect of his game. But we talked about some of the guys they drafted. They drafted 3 secondary players last year who all we're all going to get opportunities at some point here. DJ Turner and DJ Ivey, the cornerbacks. There's going to be some competition there. It's not going to be just an easy road for Cam Taylor-Britt, and I don't think an easy road for Mike Hilton either. If those two guys, I think, are really on the spot here with these two rookies coming in. And then you look at Jordan Battle coming from Alabama. He's sort of the third safety now on this team. So when they get into those 3 safety sets, this is what you'll see. Maybe Dax Hill comes up and plays in the slot, like we know that he can. And then you got Battle and Nick Scott on the back end. I think that's a possibility that we could see as well. But to have your bench be 3 rookies, that's an ambitious venture for the Bengals defensive coaches. Now we'll take a look at the run support from this defensive back group, and they got a really good safety group for run support. Dax Hill and Nick Scott are really sure arm tacklers. They're reliable tacklers. Mike Hilton, this is why he's one of the better nickel guys in the league, because of how aggressive he is in the run game. Chidobe Awuzie, Cam Taylor-Britt haven't really ever showed that propensity. And I think that hurts Cam Taylor-Britt more so than Chidobe Awuzie, at least for this season. Because you got a guy like DJ Turner, who is a little bit more aggressive in the run game. DJ Ivey, not really. Tyson Anderson, not really. Jordan Battle, you need to develop him a little bit. I think there was some upside there. He didn't really approach what you were hoping he would. And DJ Turner is obviously that more of an athlete. He's got all that speed that you can put him on the field against these ultra fast receivers that some of these teams have. And I think that you're not so worried about getting particularly burned when you have DJ Turner on the field. And I think that's where he's going to get a lot of opportunities, maybe more than what's expected, at least this year. And I think as the season goes on, you'll see him getting more and more and more chances to play over a guy like DJ Ivey, who's really just he's a really good 5th corner, a developmental piece for the cornerback position. And again, drafting a year ahead of your needs type of a deal. There is a world where next year it is DJ Turner, DJ Ivey, Cam Taylor-Britt, Dax Hill, and Jordan Battle being your 5 defensive backs with Nick Scott in there as well. So there is a world where that happens, but I don't know that you want it to happen this year, obviously. So just running through the positional summaries again, and you like the edge rush, and you like the depth, the interior, the linebackers. It's all good. You need the defensive backs to step up in the pass game this year. And I think that because you got such a strong edge rush group, your pass rush is going to be so good in so many ways, and your intermediate pass coverage with the linebackers is going to be so good as well. It allows the cornerbacks and the safeties to play a little bit more aggressively, which I think is going to lead to a lot of success for this team, and they're going to outperform maybe a lot of the deficiencies they might have projected coming into the year. In terms of run defense, it's balanced. It's a good group. I'm not opposed to this group in particular. I'm just worried about the depth in particular on the interior. So overall, this is my 7th best defense in the league. They rank 10th in pass defense and 9th in rush defense. It's a good group. Again, like I said, I'm not opposed to this rush defense at all. I think there's a good balance there. The pass defense, really led by that pass rush, is going to allow that back end to play super aggressive and maybe outperform this. And the overall defensive ability, this defense is going to be a giant catalyst to maybe covering up the deficiencies the offense has in the run game. That's going to allow them to keep these leads late in games where maybe the offense might struggle to be able to put a team away, especially if they're turning around and running the football. I think they're a team now where the defense is going to play well enough that maybe they'll be able to use the pass game to put teams away, with a little bit more faith than another team with less talent would be inclined to do. So overall, this record, I got them going 14-3. They play San Francisco and Kansas City. I got them losing those road games. The only two teams I have ranked higher than them in this deep dive series, they will lose. I do have them losing to them, both road games. I think if those were home games, maybe they would be able to pull it off a little bit. But I think that these road games, I think are going to be difficult. I know that it's Burrowhead and Burrow owns the Chiefs. I can't go based off that. I just can't go based off that. I gotta go based off like what my gut tells me that I know that this seems to be the AFC rivalry going forward. Mahomes and Burrow, Chiefs and Bengals, but I think the Chiefs could get them late in the year, especially late in the year where maybe there could be some depth issues for the Bengals that could possibly exist in some key situations like the interior defensive line, like the offensive line. And I do have Jacksonville stealing a win from them as well. In the middle of the season there on the road, I think they got a bit of a tough run going into that Jacksonville game. San Francisco, Buffalo, Baltimore, Pittsburgh. Like 4 out of those 5 games, Houston by the middle of the season could have it figured out as well. That's a bit of a gauntlet for them to go through. So I think a team like Jacksonville at home, with the talent level that they have, halfway through the season where maybe Trevor Lawrence has figured it out with Calvin Ridley a little bit more, that's a team that could definitely catch them at this point in the season. And then it gets a little easier. Indianapolis, Minnesota, they get to sort of relax to a degree a bit before going Pittsburgh. And then they're going from playing in Pittsburgh to playing in Kansas City. That's another factor for me in whether or not they win that game against Kansas City. That's a tough 2-game spread to go from playing in Pittsburgh against a really physical team and then having to go and play Kansas City the next week in Kansas City. That's a rough go as well. So there are some scheduling things that sort of lead to justify to me where these losses are coming from. So overall, quick summary here, 14-3, AFC North champions, second best team in the AFC, third best team in the league, this is the 16th best coaching staff actually. Forgot to adjust that one. But the 19th offense, 7th defense in the league. Man, when you do the graphics, sometimes. And there you have it, my number 3 team in my 2023 Deep Dive Series, the Bengals, Cincinnati Bengals, my prediction for AFC North champions, and perhaps AFC champions in general playing in the Super Bowl. It's going to be a tight one. It's going to be a tight race. Thank you for coming. If you made it this far, please like the video. It does wonders for the algorithms. Leave a comment. It does wonders for the algorithms. And subscribe if you haven't already. I got the entire series I've done so far appearing on either side of my head, the next video, and the entire playlist. I really thank you guys for being here. It's been a long summer, and we're almost there to the number 1 team and then eventually the first mock draft of the year. And I thank you guys. See you next time.